Largely centered on the government's intention to seek a 1.2 trillion shilling supplementary budget. Now, Parliament yesterday approved 220 billion shillings for the construction of the roads in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The approved funds were part of the 3.7 trillion shilling supplementary budget the finance minister sought to facilitate government activities. And as Herbert Ziwa reports, State House was given 451 billion shillings in supplementary funding. To speak to us about what this budget means, especially coming in an election cycle, we do have Sarah Bidete, the Executive Director for the Center for Constitutional Governance, and she joins me right now. Very good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, Romeo and viewers. How are you?
It's always a pleasure to have you in the studio. This could be the 10th time. You're doing well?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Yes. So the 1.9 trillion supplementary budget, what do you make of all this?
You know, we have just passed one quarter of the 2020 and 2021 budget that was passed in June. So you have a government that after 3 months of a new budget, it needs a total of 3.7 trillion because that's the total supplementary request that was tabled. Did they do wrong budgeting? Because there are two questions. One, either you don't know how to budget for your needs, or you do not have any capacity of fiscal discipline and responsibility as a regime in power.
Right.
Because if after 3 months you have a shortfall of 3.7 trillion in your expenditures, and remember we had a chain of huge supplementary budgets before the official budget because of COVID pandemic. Our supplementary budgets before the reading of this budget were coming close to 7 trillion. And then we go into a 45 trillion budget, and 3 months down the road, government does not have money to spend. Not because on top of that, you know, we are in huge borrowing. So what calls to question one is, are we able to eliminate wasteful expenditures as a government? Are we able to stay within budget lines? Because budget discipline requires sacrifice. It requires, you know, political responsibility. And I don't think we are seeing any of this. And then to make matters worse, we have a parliament that lacks political courage, I think, to ask the right questions. Because if you've run out of money after 3 months, what did you budget for? We spend our whole year budgeting. What did you budget for? What are the new expenditures? Because a supplementary budget should come in on two occasions.
Right.
One is if there is a requirement to spend money on something that you did not foresee, and we have not seen that because we dealt with COVID before the budget and in the budget process. So what has happened that requires this money? There is no such a excuse was tabled. There's no explanation that was tabled in this line. There is also 3% room for change within budget that does not require parliament approval. So if all these government departments can internally do a 3% reallocation, now the 1.8 trillion that is beyond the reallocation, what has happened that we did not foresee before the budget process?
Sarah, State House is getting 400 billion Uganda shillings from this supplementary budget in a time like this. Don't you think it will tilt the favor in the, favor for the person who is appropriating this money, State House?
And they call it classified expenditure. I think really what we are witnessing is total abuse of budget processes in this country, is total political irresponsibility, and lack of political courage on the part of Parliament. I hope Parliament can explain why they approve every other supplementary budget and without asking the actual citizens. Because if you say this money for State House is classified, what is classified about State House? State House has 2 legal occupants and they are private staff. You know, the president, his wife, all the children are of age and in their families. So who is spending this money in State House? What is State House purchasing? What are they spending money on that they have already finished their annual budget and they need 400 more.
Do you believe this 400 more is meant to help give the incumbent leverage over the other opposition law lists?
Of course, in politics, timing is everything. If you look at the timing of this budget, I think people are looking for campaign money from taxpayers, which is complete political irresponsibility.
Many people are saying maybe this is what the power of the incumbency is all about.
Of course,
you enjoy such things.
Incumbency comes with its own advantages that you cannot put away with. But when it is coupled with lack of fiscal responsibility, then it becomes a burden, a much bigger burden to a taxpayer, like we are seeing. So I think really it would be prudent to imagine or to think that this is money for campaigns, and whereas other political parties are struggling, looking for money in a draconian political regime, because we don't have laws that enable political parties to do proper fundraising, both internal and externally. So whereas the opposition are struggling looking for money, we have the regime that is fully funded by a taxpayer. First is money going to political parties, where the NRM took the lion's share.
The 15 billion last week.
Yes. Of more than 75%, I think, of that budget goes to NRM. So you have a party already is fully funded by a taxpayer. And then now you have the candidate. He's also fundraising from a taxpayer.
But do you believe that this is an illegality? Because according to the Political Parties and Organizations Act 2010, it clearly states under Section 14B that in the event of a general election, funding is supposed to be on an equal basis. But this is not what we saw this time around last week. It was actually aggregated based on numerical strength in Parliament. Do you think this was an illegality in that regard?
Yes, there is connivance on because finance gave that directive to Electoral Commission that to distribute money according to numerical strength in Parliament, contrary to that provision on elections. And the Electoral
So what does that
Commission
mean?
says they can only spend money on a directive on which they received it. So, but the Electoral Commission has a stronger responsibility because they are the custodians of political parties. So all political parties are accountable, reports to Electoral Commission. They are the ones who register, they receive annual reports from all these political parties. So they house political parties in this country. So if there was a directive that contradicted the law, the provisions of the law, they should have questioned that directive before spending money. And I saw some people are going to court over that expenditure.
Sarah, it seems like since this election cycle started, it hasn't been about the political ideals or ideas. It's been about money, money, money. And someone is wondering out there, the viewer who is watching, why is Uganda's politics so overly commercialized? No one is talking about what they will do when they get into power, maybe renovate hospitals, bring about a new health system, education system, and so forth. It's about money, money, money. What is the role of money in politics in Uganda?
Our elections are a grand auction. You need to see the level of political patronage in this country. A lot of people contesting for offices are camped in what you would call the Godfather homes. Yeah, so if you know some of the Godfather homes, there is one, I'm told a lot of NRM contenders are now camped at Anite Amongi's home. Anite, who is supposedly an opposition candidate. I think now she joined NRM. Yes. So you have this political patronage where if you don't have a godfather, then you're almost eliminated. And those are part of the fights we saw in the NRM primaries. But beyond that, godfather in politics and then money, there is no other issue that is defining our politics.
Is it, let's talk about over commercialization of politics. Is it the reason why we've gotten a wrong crop of leaders within this country? Because they only pay for these positions.
You see, once you take democracy and contestation for office or your own legitimacy for being in power as money, as we see with the ruling party, because their surviving legitimacy is basically money. They pay their way all through, including making laws, including, you know, everything that the regime wants. It is a pay-as-you-go regime. So once you have that kind of architecture in our politics, it is all rotten from top to bottom. And to clean it up, to change it, you need a complete overhaul. Because I don't think that NRM, however much they can talk, can claim to take money out of politics when it is their only thriving and surviving card in politics and keeping power.
Sarah Birete, the Executive Director for the Center for Constitutional Governance. At this opportune moment, we are also joined by Mr. Morrison Rakakamba. He is the proprietor of the Agency for Transformation. A very good morning, Mr. Rakakamba. Mr. Rakakamba, he is joining us via Zoom. Teko, do we have Mr. Rakakamba on Zoom? Yes, a very good morning, Mr. Rakakamba.
Sarah Virete, how are you?
Great. Morrison, is this what the power of the incumbency is all about? The ability to deliver on campaign promises without the financial stress your opponents go through? The supplementary budget.
Well, I heard Sarah talking about money in politics.
Yes.
But I think what the supplementary budgets are about should be about programs that benefit the people of Uganda.
Ideally, that's what it should be about, but that's not what is taking center stage, Morrison.
And the other point really for me is, for starters, is that a supplementary budget is a vote of no confidence in the national budget, because it shows that we have not planned extremely very well. And I think over the years, we have seen a planning process, an extensive budget process that never delivers a concrete budget execution. Mid the financial year, you see all these requests from different departments for the supplementary budgets. And for me, that constitutes a no confidence, a vote of no confidence in the national budget process. So I think there is a problem there. But having said that, we have to first figure out the state of affairs in the country, but also the state of affairs across the world, especially with the onslaught of the coronavirus pandemic. Because all over the world, governments, ministries of finance, central banks are thinking stimulus. The United States, the Nancy Pelosi and Stephen Mnuchin, who is the Treasury Secretary, they are also debating and discussing the nitty-gritties of a stimulus, package to benefit households. So I really see this supplementary budget as a way of a stimulus package to be able to help Ugandans. First of all, in my view, try to, gain, survivability, especially with the havoc that has been wreaked by the pandemic. But the clear broader view in terms of what we should be discussing is where exactly is this money going? What sectors is it going to propel? Number one, I have noticed that a bigger percentage of the resources is going into national agriculture advisory services and funding operations around agriculture. And this is where most Ugandans are in terms of the enterprises that they are pursuing. But how it is going to be delivered, that is where I have a problem. At the Agency for Transformation, we believe that resources for agriculture should essentially be going to drive what we call a zero interest rate regime in the country, where money is put aside for people who are engaged in farming enterprises and other agricultural value chain activities, access money at zero interest rate and be able to pay up in a space of 9 to 12 months, because that would allow them to invest the money in productive activities and not just consumptive activities. So using such resources, because we need to move away from distributing free seeds, distributing fertilizer. I think we need to kind of marketize this and make sure that we work with commercial
What should be
or
done?
work with circles, make sure that the money goes into a zero interest rate regime for people engaged in these households. So I think that is for me where we should be going.
Of course, Mr. Morrison, you did use that example of Stephen Mnuchin and Nancy Pelosi, who are actually debating the stimulus package. But as it is, Mr. Morrison, how is this money supplementary budget a stimulus package if 400 billion is going to the president? And it's classified expenditure.
Well, I know that the president is doing work in terms of, you know, a program called EMIOGA, you know, which is targeting, you know, youth livelihood programs that had started under, you know, the administration of Permanent Secretary Girmana, now that was moved into the office of the president. What I know is that they have selected youth groups in almost every sub-counties, women groups, to be able to benefit from the EMIOGA fund, which is run under the office of the president. But having said that, I've been looking at the list, and among the entrepreneur groups they have listed is leaders and youth leaders. I don't think that should be a category of EMIOGA. So of course, even within the EMIOGA program, there are certain dynamics that we need to deep dive. Because really, my brother, I think we need to be looking at the budget lines. Where is this money actually going, and is it going to actually drive, you know, and stimulate innovation and entrepreneurship? So I think those programs, where it is going, there are challenges, but they are good intentions. But also somebody said that, you know, even the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So what we need to interrogate are those intentions.
Morrison Rakakamba is the proprietor of the Agency for Transformation. He's saying this money was meant to be a fiscal, to offer a stimulus package to the households in Uganda that are grappling under the COVID-19 pandemic. Sarah, we are seeing 400 billion going to State House, and many saying this is campaign money.
No, I think
Do you agree with him?
my brother Morrison is discussing the ideal because the reality maybe is too shocking for him. Because the biggest chunk of money, classified budget, is going to State House, and it's classified, meaning you cannot even know what it is spent on. And then the other money, the biggest, is a Ministry of Defense.
So it cannot be a stimulus package.
1.124 trillion is going under Ministry of Defense. And Rakakamba thinks that the president is taking money for EMIOGA. EMIOGA has a separate budget allocation. So I think the reality is too shocking for Morris, and he chose to discuss the ideal. So, but there was no debate, Morris, on a stimulus package. We know that there is no readiness for a reasonable stimulus package by this regime to mitigate the COVID impact. We know that people are on their own, unless, of course, you're connected, like the bank letters we see. It say, don't sell this person's house because she's a friend and he was a friend here and there. But Ugandans are on their own. There is no meaningful stimulus package by this regime. There is money that has been put under the Uganda Development Bank. But to access this money, even it goes to the political privilege of this country. It's not for ordinary citizens.
Even the 22 billion that was meant for private teachers has not been seen.
And it's not in the supplementary budget either.
And it's not even
so
there.
what Rakakamba what is discussing is something else. We know that other countries have instead cut costs because of COVID constraints. Other countries have cut costs. Other countries are spending within the limits and realities of their nations. Because on top of this supplementary budget, which is now making our budget 49 trillion, because we are moving now from 45 to 49 trillion.
Right.
We know that this money might not even pay our debt burden. Uganda is, you know, before COVID, we had been denied some lending codes by international lenders because we are in the red. We had hit the red limit. So on top of this money, we are borrowing, looking for a loan of 6 trillion on the same day.
Let's talk about the ramifications, Sarah Birete, of approving such a supplementary budget in light of an election cycle.
I know MPs expressed reservations yesterday, especially the 1.8 trillion, which falls beyond the 3% threshold that needs parliament approval before spending. And it is important to note that also Bahat, who is now like a Minister of State in charge of supplementary budgets, notified the Parliament that a lot of this money has already been spent. So even that is intended to abuse even the provision of supplementary budget. Because you come and tell Parliament, whether you approve or not, we have spent the money. That is also an abuse of that provision. As much as supplementary budgets, you know, in a way, abuse the budget process, even when, especially when they are tabled wrongly. So the plan to come and inform Parliament that we have already, you know, spent the money. So you either you approve or not, because money is already spent anyway. So that ties Parliament in a way. But we also know that Parliament is not doing a good job in scrutinizing and refusing some of these excessive expenditures.
Morrison, if you can hear me, what would be the immediate ramifications of approving such a supplementary budget in the middle of an election cycle?
Well, I mean, first of all, we have a parliament. And the parliament, as you know, according to our constitution, has got what they call appropriatory powers. So the power of the budget rests in the people of Uganda, represented by a parliament. Okay? And, you know, if the parliament is making mistakes, I think that is where we should be zooming. We shouldn't be zooming at the president and the Minister of Finance, because the government headed by the president, represented by the Minister of Finance, presents proposals. And it is up to our representatives, who are the members of parliament, to actually dissect and look at the budget line by line and determine whether that money is actually going to useful activities that do help the people of Uganda. Okay? So, to your question now, Sarah is talking about classified expenditure. You know, according to the new Finance Act, and my sister Sarah Verete knows, there is a committee in Parliament that looks at expenditures under the classified budget line. And even the Auditor General now looks at those documents to ensure that the money is spent in the line of public interest and not the private interest. There is now this issue around how do we therefore spend this money during elections? I mean, during elections that are coming in the midst of a crisis, during an election, people have to eat. Businesses have to continue. You know, services have to continue being delivered. So I really don't want us to mix that. Unless, if there is a budget line, for example, going to the Electoral Commission, I think that's justifiable. If there is a budget line, because remember, even during an election, according to our constitution, which my sister Sarah, a lawyer, is very much aware of, there remains a government in place, the president remains in place, the LC5 remain in place until May of 2021. So there is a government that is supposed to deliver its constitutional functions. Okay? You know, this is a time when I have been, you know, watching the elections, the primary elections taking place across the country. And you actually realize that where most people live above, you know, the poverty line, those elections have tended to be extra contentious because there is civic consciousness. In areas where most people live below the poverty line, those elections have really been, you know, for sale. As Albert Einstein said, an empty stomach is a bad political advisor. So you actually need this stimulus for people to do businesses, for people to, you know, have money in their pocket. That's how they even make better decisions, because they have got vested economic interest. That's how I look at it.
Sources of funding for these political parties. You have the Alliance for Campaign, you're saying?
Yeah, but really the final point, which I also want to emphasize, is that most Ugandans, almost over 80%, are dependent on agriculture and agricultural value chains. You know, they are traders, they are truck drivers, they are farmers, they are input dealers. That's where I want to see money going, and I think it should be delivered not in a way of giving handouts, not in a way of distributing seeds, but pushing, using this money to push interest rates in people's banks, in circles, zero interest rate. And we make sure that these people pay back, you know, in a space of 9 to 12 months. That's how you do a stimulus.
We saw government release 15 billion Uganda shillings meant to be distributed among the various political parties within the country. But then, according to the Political Parties and Organizations Act of 2010, under Section Section 14B of that Act, it states that in respect to general elections, funding for political parties should be done on equal basis. And Section 14C of the same Act states that in respect to day-to-day activities, funding should be based on numerical strength. But we are in a general election, and what we saw government do was to actually award this money based on numerical strength. Mr. Morrison, was this an illegality?
The good thing now, we have got a litigious country. People can litigate that in the Constitutional Court and other places. But my view is that even under the rubric of IPOD, which is the inter-party, an inter-party platform in this country, people who allocated this money, it's on the strength of representation in Parliament. That's a formula that was generally agreed. And I think it would be unfair if you have one member of Parliament like Jema, and you say you are also supposed to get equal taxpayers' money, because clearly you did not work hard. So I think political parties that work hard to make sure that they have got representatives across the country, I think those are the political parties that should get the, an equal appropriation in terms of their strength. I think that formula is logical. It makes no sense. Otherwise, if we moved with, because we have over 40 registered political parties in this country, if you say every political party is supposed to get equal amount of money, myself and Sarah Berete would unite at a certain junction in this country, go register a political party and say, we are also entitled to the consolidated, money in the consolidated fund, just like the way NRM or FDC gets it. I think that would defeat logic.
Kakamba, the proprietor for the Agency of Transformation, saying yes, that funding for these political parties should be based on numerical strength, is disregarding the Political Parties and Organizations Act, which clearly states under Section 14B that in respect to general elections like this one that we are grappling with, yes, funding for political parties should be on an equal basis. So the money that was released last week should have been given on an equal basis. It doesn't matter if the NRM has 293 legislators within Parliament, or if this has only 36, or if DP has only 15, they should be getting this money on an equal basis. But as it is, the government has chosen to only adhere to Section 14C of the same Act, which states that in the event of normal day-to-day activities, funding should be based on numerical strength. Who has the biggest number within Parliament? We also have the Cecilia Ogwal, the Dokolo woman MP. She has joined us right now within studio. Would like to get her sentiments on the issues we are discussing here. Very good morning, Ms. Cecilia Ogwal.
Good morning.
Yes,
morning.
Let's talk about the 3.7 supplementary budget. Is it within the limit?
Oh, well, that's a very big issue. It's unfortunate that I've come a bit late.
It's okay.
We in the pandemic, the vehicles are still very.
Indeed.
They're very necessary.
The viewer is very understanding.
So that's very understanding. The supplementary has a number of issues. I'm sure you have already discussed the key critical issues. And as usual, I try to look at things from both lenses, from the government lens and also from other lenses. So I was a bit perturbed that the supplementary was not focused to priority areas as I had anticipated. But yes, we got the 3-point-something trillion for funding the supplementary expenditure in the current year.
So I would like to know, what are the ramifications of approving such money in the middle of an election cycle?
Well, you know, the public has been following the debate on the budget.
Yes.
First of all, in principle, the entire budget process, the one of 2021, which we are implementing now, lacked prioritization of areas, critical areas. Secondly, it maintained the spending extravagance as if all were normal, as if there was no pandemic. These were areas which were cited and they were brought out in our minority report. So right from the beginning, there were pitfalls which needed to be dealt with, and they were not dealt with. To the extent that the budget was passed in a hurry, but the government pledged to come back with revised figures to give us the actual position of what the budget should have looked like for this particular year. We have been waiting for that. We have been asking for that. It has not come. But what I can tell you straight away is that looking at the pandemic situation at the moment, the COVID-19 has brought in new activities. We have to adopt new style of life, and we have to abandon quite a number. But from government operations perspective, there were very many critical areas which consume a lot of funding, which were left out. For example, air flights. That is one of the issues that used to excite members of parliament a lot. You know, going out on trips in order to do some studies.
So part of this money is for trips.
So the money has been saved not only in parliament, the entire government department have saved money on travels, saved money on seminars, saved money on inland travels, saved money on many, many things. Now, the budget did not leave those out. And we had felt that maybe the best way would have been highlight critical issues like air travel, inland travel, and so on, maintenance of vehicles, because we are not using much now. And then cut across certain selected sectors, about 20% or 50%. We would have saved that money and then transfer it to the Ministry of Health, as who was really the ministry needed money at that time, a lot of money. But the government didn't look at it that way. So the budget was passed. The argument given was that the process started much, much earlier, which is true. It started before we were confronted with the COVID pandemic. So they said, now we cannot go back and reverse what has already been put in place, which we sympathize with. But after we went through that crisis, you definitely witnessed the ugly scenes that took place. There were lots of disagreements, lots of contradictions. But at the end of the day, the budget was read. We stood at 45 trillion, a lot of money, of course. And we have been expecting government to say, yes, you gave us 45 trillion. This is how we have saved, and so on. Now, the government is coming to us. Yesterday, actually, it was a shock. I mean, the other day, it was a shock because not only was the government asking more funding, both Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. Now, if I may give just a 30-second explanation under Schedule 1. Under Schedule 1, I put it very, very strongly to the government when that budget was being passed, that left with only 2 days, 2 working days, there is no way that billions of shillings would have been transferred through the process. You know, the procedure of transferring money from government to the consuming agencies was not easy. 2 days was not enough. So it was clear that we passed that budget knowing very well that the money would not be utilized within that period. But we did it anyway, which I think was really bad on our part as a parliament. We should have avoided that. But having done it, the government has come back as anticipated and as warned. They have come back to say, yes, the money you gave us, we couldn't use it. We couldn't use it within the time. So we have come with Schedule 1. So that has been clearly elaborated in Schedule 1 for, I'm sure you have had opportunity to look at it. And then, of course, Schedule 2 has also come to either repeat some of the expenditures which were already catered for in the actual budget, but even asking for more. And again, and that's really what upset me, the government came up making a request of 4-point-something trillion to borrow domestically to fund some of the activities, and also ask for a loan from IMF for about 600,000 US dollars. Now, to an economy which is already stressed, and Parliament has been asking government to come to us with mitigating package in order to help the economy, and so we have been asking for that. So
and then you have Morrison Rakakamba, who is saying the 3.7 supplementary budget is meant to do just that. Do you agree that this is a stimulus package?
For citizens.
Do you agree?
Well, the bad news or the good news that I understand a bit of economics, so I don't agree 100%.
Go ahead.
No, I don't agree.
Thank you.
I think there are a number of things which have been done, because one of them, we are also looking at the income tax bill.
So if this is not a stimulus package,
No,
and 400 billion,
not, we are still waiting for stimulus.
we are still
package.
waiting. So we have
We are still
400
waiting.
billion that is going to State House. This is the president. Do you
Yes.
believe the 3.7 billion supplementary budget was meant to be a campaign package for the president?
I don't want to talk about something I don't know.
Okay, let's first get to Morrison
which
Rakakamba.
are
He
not
wanted to
factual.
say something. Mr. Morrison,
Yes,
you wanted to
yes,
say something?
Yes. You know, Romeo, I think there is, when I hear our senior speaking, I really see a major problem, especially in the governance architecture of the national budget and also the conduct of business in Parliament. Because I would have expected that she would come and tell us that the budget passed, the clear budget lines for the people of Uganda. For example, looking at her constituents in Dokoro, that these small businesses, that these farmers are actually in the bigger trillions of money that we pass, this money, this is where it is going, and it is going to help the people. But when you have a parliament that over the years approves supplementary budgets, which in my view is a vote of no confidence in the national budget, yet that parliament has appropriatory powers, then you see that there is a problem. And I think the bigger elephant that we are not addressing in this scenario, beyond the politics that you're talking about, is really this Public Finance Act, which is essentially, on paper, is supposed to give powers to Parliament to actually appropriate, deliberate, and deliver on the budget. But we have seen very disturbing trends that, for example, you know, our senior Honorable Cecilia Ogwara and her colleagues can pass a budget and say, let's push 100 billion to the Ministry of Energy, for example. But I can tell you that the choice in terms of who releases that 100 billion is dependent on what happens in the Ministry of Finance. To the extent that you have sectors, key critical productive sectors of the economy, where money is appropriated by Parliament, but when it comes to the release, you find Ministry of Energy 20% release. Then you find some other ministry 100% release. Then you find some other sector 80%. And so the choice on how these resources are released is not a parliamentary function. So meaning that, because you see, this budget document or the powers of the budget is where the political power lies. And I think that what Parliament has under the rubric of Public Finance Act is Bioyanswa. So I think we need to really reform to that.
All right, Morrison Rakakamba is appropriate of the Agency for Transformation. Thank you very much. We have a few minutes left to wrap up this conversation. I'm going to give Sarah Birete a minute to counter those accusations or submissions from Cecilia Ogwal and Morrison Rakakamba.
I wanted to add one rejoinder to what Honorable Cecilia Ogwal is saying. You know, the 45 trillion budget was passed on the understanding that government will reallocate money for items that are not being
Included.
spent on because of the COVID pandemic. And that includes air travels, you know, treatment abroad, and all those kinds of things. So the understanding was that government should have saved money within the 45 trillion, and they should have come to Parliament to say, this is the internal savings we have done, and these are the reallocations we are seeking approval for within the limited approved national budget, but not seek for additional 4 trillion like they did.
But I think, in addition to what she has said, we are confronted with even other pandemic over and above the COVID-19. In my own district, for example, about 4 sub-counties are submerged in the flood. You have heard about it in Kasese, Bundipujo,
Toroko.
In several areas.
Indeed.
So that's another pandemic. Now, which have not featured.
Yeah, in the budget.
And many of my people were being accommodated in schools. Schools are going to reopen, and we are stuck with these several thousands of family members who have been displaced by the flood. And they are not catered for
in this budget.
And
of course, Honorable Ogwal, we are running out of time, but there is a burning issue you haven't pronounced yourself on, the issue of political funding. 15 billion was released last week, but then it was shared based on numerical strength instead of being shared on equal basis as mandated in the Political Parties and Organizations Act under Section 14B. What do you make of all this? Was it an illegality? And can these organizations sue? 1 minute.
Well, I think that is a rather slippery area. You and me will not be able to handle it effectively.
Right.
I have been dealing with political party issues for several years. I understand what it is. But what I can say is that probably the opposition needed to be a little bit more organized in order to strategically get what is theirs in order to play their role.
So they didn't get the money because they were disorganized?
So I think if you are not unanimous, if you are not together in what you are trying to pursue, at least identify some of the key areas where you agree, and you say, on these particular areas, this is what we are going to do. But the issue of funding came in now that we are talking about election, but the issue of funding should have already been there. Some of us have been driving them in the budget processes to ensure that political parties are catered for. And the political parties should have also been very vigorous to say, look, the money you have given us is not enough because of A, B, C, D. And they are not allowed to raise money openly. Because if you raise money, then there's so many legal issues and so on. They sometimes suspect that opposition are funded by wrong organization or what they call clandestine organization. So the political parties, the opposition are operating under very, very difficult situations.
Well, thank you very much, Honorable Cecilia Ogwal, the Dokloman MP, alongside the Executive Director for the Constitutional, for the Center for Constitutional Governance, Sarah Birete. We also did have Morrison Rakakamba, the proprietor of the Agency for Transformation. Please, all of you, thank you very much for your time.